Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Crimson Crossover Podcast presented by the Field of 68. I'm Christian Sykes, joined as always by Charles Branch. And as you'll see this week, in lieu of Joey, I think we got a pretty special guest, Bryan Passink, color commentator for CTSN Sports Radio for basketball, I believe. Bryan, how you doing? I'm super excited to have you on the podcast today.
Well, I'm doing great. Had a nice little road trip through the old Southwest Conference. Got a couple wins in Fayetteville and Austin, and now a little tired but feeling good. And I look on my schedule, and it turns out Auburn's next. Who would have guessed? Nobody's really been talking about this one, huh? No, it's a huge week for Alabama, and just with what happened Saturday in Fayetteville, and then in Austin, this is first place is on the line. Alabama did what they needed to do, and Auburn, to their credit, they did what they needed to do, and it's why this game is so massive coming up on Saturday.
Well, as a former player in basketball, what for you when you were playing, what was this kind of rivalry game like? What did that mean for you during your time in Alabama?
Well, I mean, listen, this is all the cliches are true in this one. The record books and all that. It's Alabama Auburn. The Iron Bowl of basketball is some people like to call it. I personally love it, and I've loved this series, this rivalry. When things have been on the line, and they have been more so for Alabama over the history than Auburn, but listen, they've had a lot on the line too, especially since Bruce Pearl has been their coach. This is as good as it gets, as big as it gets. And now all of a sudden, the national audience is paying attention with what both Alabama and Auburn are doing. Never thought I'd see a one versus two. Really, technically, it's a one versus one. First time in the history of athletics in the Alabama Auburn series to have a number one versus number two. It's amazing that as good as the football series has been, that it's never been a one versus two. Here we have it in basketball, and I can't wait to see it. But listen, going back to my playing days, it meant so much. I mean, it was a bigger game. You say all the right things as a player and as a coach. Taking one game at a time, it only counts one on your schedule and in the win-loss column. But you talk to anybody that played in this series or been a part of it, and listen, I mean, it's same for the fans. I mean, it does. This game carries more weight, and it should. It's as great a rivalry in all sports as there is, and for this basketball rivalry to be where it is right now is just really exciting for all that are involved and all that have cared about it when maybe the nation wasn't watching. Didn't matter. You were part of it, and it was a big deal to you. Now it's a big deal to everybody, which is really cool.
Well, and you talk about throwing out record books and motivations. A lot of the time, players or fans when they're talking about rivalry games, they say, "Oh, well, this team's more hungry or more motivated." At your time at Alabama, did you ever feel like, "Oh, because this is the Iron Bowl of basketball, and maybe one year Auburn beats you, and so next year, do you have that additional motivation to kind of get back at them? Does that help you at all during your performance during the games?"
Yeah. Now, fortunately, we had a lot of success against
Yeah,
Auburn last
yeah, of
night,
course.
and thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah.
That was a pretty one-sided series back in the day, and ran into some former teammates in Austin, Robert Ory, and Darby Rich, Melvin Cheatham, who played before me, got to hang out with those guys, and they're loving what's going on with Alabama basketball. But that series meant a lot to all of us, and that was a time, especially, I was in the 90s and then even in the 80s, where Alabama dominated that series. But, there were a couple of times that Auburn snuck up and got us, and it hurt. And, that one hurts more than the others. But, there's no extra motivation needed. This is one of those games where and Nate Oates, has a very different style than Wimp Sanderson did. But this was one of those games that Coach Sanderson would come in the locker room and try to settle you down. He'd have you ready to run through a brick wall and try to motivate you for some of the games against teams that maybe you weren't ready. You weren't going to get up for as naturally, some of the mid-major type games. But the Auburn game, you were going extra hard in practice. There was an extra intensity. There was an extra focus. You knew that this was a big deal. And then maybe right before the game, Coach Sanderson did a good job. He would read the room and know that guys are ready to run through a brick wall. And while that's good, you also need to settle down and pay attention to the scouting report and be calm on the offensive end. Make sure you're focused and make your free throws and you're not too hyped up, which is something that I think both coaches will have to look out for in this game, because I don't think motivation is going to be a problem for anybody. If Alabama and Auburn were playing in this game and both teams came in with losing records, motivation is not going to be a problem. But now you have 1 versus 2 or 1 versus 1. These teams are going to be hyped up. The crowd's going to be incredible. And maybe the most important thing is for guys to just settle down and play their best. And some guys are going to, use that to their advantage and play hard and play aggressive. And some might need to settle down a little bit. But coaches will tell each and every guy, however you have to do it, get ready to play, be at your best. And I expect all these guys will on Saturday.
Talking
So
about,
yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say that you had a question about that.
Yeah, so I want to talk about this year's team, and I think the last 3 games, last 120 minutes of basketball that we've played a pretty solid 110 minutes. A few minutes here against Georgia, a few minutes here against Arkansas. What would be your assessment of this team up into this point, as far as how they perform, managing the expectations, and just what the first 2/3 of the season has looked like for this basketball team?
Well, I think this team's getting better, and that's something that Chris Stewart and I talked about for the last few months. Is this team is really good, but their ceiling is super high, and that's something that I think may, and I hope, with my crimson colored glasses, hopefully will separate Alabama from some of the top teams in the country. Is when you look at Nate Oates' coach teams, his teams typically get better and better as the year goes on. Now, barring injury, and that's something that this team has had to deal with. But his teams typically get better. And when I look at what this team has done to be, I believe it's 21-3 now, 10-1 in the SEC, they are ahead of my expectations for where I thought this team would be at this point in the season from a record standpoint. When I watch them play, I still think even after what they did at Arkansas and what they did at Texas and what they've done in some of the bigger, more high-profile games, is this team can get better. And when you have guys like Jaron Stevenson stepping up, scoring a career-high 22 points, you know that he's capable of playing more like that than some of the games earlier in the year where he really struggled. LeBaron Philon is a player that's coming off of a little bit of an injury, and he had a great start to the season. It's been a little bit up and down lately, but he's starting to hit his stride. Darian Reed, a guy that we hope will be back, not sure if he'll be back on Saturday, but he'll definitely be back at some point. I mean, we forget he's one of the most highly touted players to come into this program ever from a ranking standpoint. 5-star, McDonald's All-American, I think one of the top 5 highest rated recruits in Alabama basketball history. He hasn't played in a while, and when he hasn't been full speed. I think this team can get better on the defensive end. They have at times over the last couple of weeks of the season. We've seen them get better, but not maybe as consistent as I think they'll be later in the season. This team is much better defensively than they were a year ago. I think they can be much better a month from now than they are today. And then offensively, turnovers have been a problem. And I say that, and you look at the offensive numbers, this is the leading scoring team in college basketball. They're the fastest paced team in the country. Turned it over, I think, 17 to 18 times against Texas, which is way too many. but you go on the road and score 103 points. So the ceiling for this team is super high. And I think, as typical of NATO's teams, this team is going to continue to get better as the year goes on.
Talking about things where need to improve, and last night showed improvement in the second half of just closing the game out. Went into halftime up to 18. Texas never really threatened, ended up winning the game by 23 points. But there's been a lot of games this year where you've gotten up double digits, or you feel like you've had a team on the ropes, and those teams have gotten back into the games and made it a lot closer than what we as Alabama fans would have wanted. As a fan, am I not valuing enough the opponents that we've played in those games and their talent level and getting it back, getting it close? Or are there some things that our guys can continue to improve on as far as keeping that intensity level high, having good defensive and offensive possessions? And what I keep talking about is just winning time. You're at
Yeah.
that point of the game where you can win it with 5, 10 minutes left in the second half and just put a team away. Where do you feel like this team is continuing to make those improvements, and or am I just not giving enough credit to those opponents?
Yeah, maybe both are a little bit true. I mean, 21-3, I think we would all take that with as tough as the schedule has been and as good as the SEC is to be 10-1 in this league. But I do agree. This team is one of the things that I was talking about and why I'm so optimistic about what this team could do going in to March in the SEC tournament and hopefully continue to compete for a regular season title on to Nashville and then in the NCAA tournament, because those are areas that they can get better. And I think they have. And I thought last night in Austin was a good example. Texas played really well. They're super talented. They have one of the most talented offensive teams in the SEC, which means you're one of the most talented teams in the country. And they got it going. Trey Johnson is an elite level scorer at the college level. I think he's going to be that next year in the NBA. Those guys started making shots. They started getting into an offensive rhythm. And while it would have been great to see Alabama get more stops on the defensive end in the second half, they stayed focused and aggressive offensively and kept the pedal down on the offensive end. And that game was never in doubt. And it could have been. And I think maybe a lesson learned from what happened a few days before in Fayetteville, where Alabama did let off the gas a little bit on both ends of the floor. And again, a talented Arkansas team that had been playing as well as anybody in the SEC got hot, cut it to three. And then in winning time, Alabama got the stops they needed. They made the plays. You had certain guys step up in key situations and got a road win in front of 20,000, which is not easy to do. And I think this team got better in Fayetteville. I think we saw some of the lessons learned in Austin, and hopefully that continues over the course of the season.
I've viewed this team as very business-like throughout the season and not really showing a ton of emotion, whether getting too high or getting too negative. I mean, we've obviously had games where calls don't go our way, but I've never really seen an overreaction from this team. And now you're stepping into this Saturday where you expect emotions to be high, at least from the crowd. And you just talked about how Coach Sanderson might come in the locker room when y'all are playing Auburn and try to tamp things down. Where do you feel like emotions will be with this team? And do you think it's something to be concerned about that may be a little bit out of character of being more emotional and affect their play on the court?
I really like the demeanor of this team. I mean, I think emotionally that they're pretty steady, and I think that's important over the course of the season. But I see guys getting fired up in their own way. Not everybody's a rah-rah guy. Not everybody's, a loud in the locker room guy. I mean, Mark Sears is a great example. He's as intense as they come. He's turned into a great leader, but he's not someone who's going to jump up and down maybe as much as some other guys around the country that are in his position. And I think you've got some veteran guys who, yes, are businesslike, but man, they're intense. They want to win, and they have a maturity about them that I think is going to pay off. And I hope it pays off on Saturday. And emotions are going to be high for everybody involved, whether you see it, with clapping and raising their hand and getting the crowd into it or not. Emotions are going to be high. That is not going to be an issue on Saturday for either team. Everybody's going to be hyped up. The crowd's going to be hyped up. The radio crew's going to be hyped up. It's going to be a lot of fun in Coleman Coliseum on Saturday. So I think it's just going to come down to who's able to play their best game. I mean, if Alabama plays well, it's going to be a good day for the good guys. If Auburn comes in, I think they've been the most proven team over the course of the season in college basketball. It's what you dream of as an Alabama fan, as an Auburn fan in this state, to have all eyes in the sport and maybe beyond the sport, because we just don't get 1 versus 2, 1 versus 1 very often in college basketball. We have it on Saturday, and I can't wait to see it.
But two guys, if we had had this conversation in June or July of last year, two guys that would have first or second question we would asked about is just how they would perform in this game is Aiden Holloway and LeBaron Fillon. And I feel like that storyline has kind of taken a back seat to just how good these teams have been and that it being 1 versus 2. But any thoughts on those guys in this game? Obviously, Aiden having a year playing at Auburn. LeBaron was originally committed to Auburn before being committed to Kansas and eventually coming to Alabama. How do you feel about those guys going into this particular game?
Well, you go back a few years ago, and we thought, or people thought around the state, that was going to be a great backcourt. We didn't know which school it was going to be for. I'm certainly glad that those guys will be wearing crimson and white on Saturday. But to me, they've been two of the biggest surprises on this Alabama team, and maybe in the SEC. Aiden Holloway has been as good as any transfer in the SEC. He has been better than advertised. A former 5-star McDonald's All-American, was an All-SEC freshman a year ago, and didn't have the year that he thought he would, and made a great decision. And you could see why Nate Oates and his staff were so excited to have Aiden Holloway in this system, playing alongside Mark Sears. To have that freedom and his ability to shoot. He's gotten so much better on the defensive end. His ability to finish at the rim, and got a little floater, a mid-range game, which you are allowed to have under Nate Oates' system, especially if you make them, which Aiden Holloway has. But that's an interesting, fun storyline in this series for sure. And then LeBaron Fillon, who has been one of the best freshmen in the country to start the year, been a little bit banged up, hasn't been quite as good over the last month or so, but he's rounding back into form. I think he's healthy, and he played one of his best games in a long time last night in Austin against the Longhorns. So I think those guys are going to play a big part in this game, and I do think guys like that, along with Jaron Stevenson, are going to be a big part of Alabama on Saturday and moving forward for the rest of the year.
Last question from me before asking you about keys to the game at the end. After this game, we still have 6 more regular season games. You still got the SEC tournament. You've got the NCAA tournament. But there's just so much hype around this game. It almost feels like the season ends, in a sense, on Saturday. Obviously, I think Coach Oates' staff, Henry Barrera, will get, the guys going for the rest of the year. But how do you kind of see things playing out for Alabama coming off of what will be an emotional game, win or lose, and still having 6 top 25 opponents, including a rematch with Auburn to finish the regular season off?
Yeah, I'll fast forward to next week. Alabama goes to Missouri, one of the top teams in the country that not everybody's talking about. I mean, they're still in position to compete for an SEC regular season title. One of the great turnarounds over the course of last year to this year in college basketball, to go 0-18, really 0-19 in the SEC last year, to be in position to possibly win an SEC regular season title. They're a really good team, and they've been really good at home. So one of the things that I know we're going to talk about, Chris and I, on Keys to the Game before the game against Missouri on Wednesday night, is how does Alabama handle either success or adversity? Because this does have a Super Bowl type feel. Well, the Super Bowl ends and you're done. You don't have to bounce back from it until the following year. This has a Super Bowl feel to it. And both teams in their midweek game next week are going to have to handle success, because they're going to be crowned as the best team in the country on Saturday night, or failure, and they're going to lose one of the biggest regular season games that either team has had in a long time. So this is a huge game. It's a big game. There's no doubt about it. There will be more hype for this regular season game than probably any of us have ever seen. But the reality is, you're not going to win a ring or not win a ring on Saturday. You can win this game and still not win the regular season. You can lose this game and you can still win it. Now, I prefer to win it, and hopefully that'll be the case. But there are 7 huge games remaining. This is the one, along with the one to finish up the regular season in Auburn, that are going to get the focus and the hype. But how each team handles either success or failure, I think, is going to determine who actually wins this league.
So before we get into the actual game, coming off last year, Alabama had game day. Tennessee came in, Alabama loses that game. One, do you think that experience for the guys that are here helps them in preparation this week for the Auburn game? And two, do you think that there's more distractions for Alabama being that they're hosting College Game Day, where, Jay Billis is coming in, they're doing interviews, they're doing, promos, all of this, any additional like things that are out of the normal? How do you think that affects this Alabama team? And do you think that last year them going through this um, helps them in their preparation?
Yeah, I hope it helps. But do I think it could be a distraction? I do. I mean, just anytime there's a big home game, we've seen it in football, where the RVs are coming in. I don't know, if there's going to be tailgate. Now, there probably will be, but the hype around the game leading up to it is going to be there. Students are going to be camped out. College Game Day is going to be there. Everybody that's any sort of affiliation with the program is being bombarded for ticket requests, including yours truly. So it is different, and there are distractions, and how you handle that is going to be to help determine who wins this game. But I would rather have those distractions at home than be on the road. So the home crowd, I think, is going to be a huge advantage for Alabama. And you go back to last year, the Tennessee game. Alabama was a banged up team. Tennessee was really good. They played really well, and that was a disappointing loss. And I think that is something that Nate Oates can use and kind of go back and look at the preparation and what he allowed his guys to be a part of and what they didn't in terms of the game day and the lead up, because that was one of the most hyped games in a long time. But I think when it comes down to it, 2 really good teams. I think probably the best 2 teams in the college basketball right now. Who is able to execute, who's able to kind of corral their emotions and play their best. And whoever does that is going to win the game. And whether College Game Day is going to be there, if they're distractions or not distractions, it's just going to come down to who is not just ready to play, but who's able to execute and play their best. It's not going to be easy. Both teams are going to be fighting. Both teams want it, and it's a huge reason why everybody's excited about this one.
All right. Well, before we let you go, give us your thoughts on the actual game. I feel like we've been teeing this up the whole time. Tell us, where you see Alabama is going to have success, where they might falter, just overall thoughts on this game. And maybe you don't have to give us like a score prediction or anything like that, but just like how you kind of see the game going.
Yeah, I think Alabama's, first of all, got to take care of the ball. Auburn is a team that takes advantage of the opponent's mistakes. They create a lot of mistakes. And one area that I'm going to be looking at as well, other than just the turnover numbers, and I kind of put this in the same category as turnovers, and that is block shots by the opponent. That is essentially a turnover, and that's something Auburn does as well as anybody. And Alabama, against teams that block a lot of shots, have struggled. So I think rim decisions are going to be a big part of this game. Alabama wants to get in the lane, and we know Nate Oates' system. Push the pace, layups, threes, get to the free throw line. And when you get inside, making those decisions in the paint, I think it's going to be critical for Alabama in this game, especially the way that Jedi Broome and Dylan Cardwell block shots. They've got athleticism. They're so good defensively, but they're really good at deflections and block shots. And turnovers, block shots are something that are going to have to be limited by Alabama on the offensive end, and how you defend Broome in the post. Right now, I think he and Cooper Flagg are probably the two front runners for National Player of the Year. And Cliff Amore has had some really big games on the defensive end, and he's had others where he hasn't been quite as good. So, how Alabama is able to limit Broome in the post, he's so good going over his right shoulder with a left hand. He'll go right, but he goes right to set up his left. So, how Alabama defends the pick and roll, he's good with angles to the basket. So, interior defense important in this one, and also guys like Denver Jones and Miles Kelly, those guys can get it going quick from the 3-point line. And Pettiford, one of the top young point guards in the country. Auburn is number one in the AP for a reason. They're really good. They've been great on the road. Alabama's going to have to be ready to play. And I'll say that when Alabama goes to Auburn in early March, Alabama has been great in the road. I think these two teams have shown a lot of toughness away from home. Auburn's going to be ready to play, but hopefully the home crowd and the Crimson Tide will roll on Saturday afternoon.
I've got one final question, and I want you to kind of summarize this game as it just relates to the state of Alabama. We finally got NCAA first and second round back in Birmingham a few years ago. The women's tournament is going to host Sweet 16 and Elite Eight in Birmingham this year. Both these programs have tried to take their programs on the road within the state, whether it's Mobile or Huntsville or using Legacy Arena in Birmingham. More, just that all eyes will be on the state of Alabama this weekend for both programs. Alabama's not sharing it with a Kentucky or a Tennessee. Auburn the same way. They're not sharing it with a Kentucky or a Florida. What does this just mean for basketball? What do you hope this means for basketball in the state of Alabama?
Well, I think basketball in this state, especially on the Alabama end, has been underrated for decades. This Alabama program, number 2 in the SEC and all-time wins in conference, and there's been a history of success going back to C.M. Newton, even before that with the Rocket 8, and of course, Wimp Sanderson, the winningest coach in Alabama history. But what Nate Oates has done recently, winning multiple championships at the SEC level in the regular season and the tournament, now going to the Final Four. Auburn under Bruce Pearl, they have been so good under Pearl. And Alabama fans have been with this basketball thing for a long time. It's good to have the Auburn fans join us about 10, 11 years ago. But there's an excitement around basketball in this state that we've never seen. And I think it just puts a spotlight on the past as well. Mentioned that Robert Horry will be before we went on the air. Robert Horry is going to be in town on Saturday, and there's a younger generation of fans that may not remember how good Robert Horry was, and Gary Waits, and Melvin Cheatham, and Hollywood Robinson, and Latrell Sprewell. And it's fun for me as a former player to be able to celebrate how good the history was, because there is so much focus now, focus like we've never seen on basketball in this state and what Alabama has done. But it's a lot of fun to have College Game Day there. A 1-versus-1 matchup. We've never seen it in SEC history, and I'm excited about it. But for those of us that have loved basketball in this state for a while, it sure is a lot of fun.
Well, Bryan, we appreciate you. We hope that we get a "Let's get out of here" from Chris on Saturday. I know that you guys, especially yourself and Chris, who spent so much time putting so much time into the program, time with the broadcasting and everything, even in the bad years, Norfolk State, the Anthony Grant 2013 year, like all of these things that all the bad that's happened like has led us to this point where we're sitting in a 1-versus-1 matchup, and hopefully the good guys, being Alabama, come out on top. But we appreciate your time. I know you probably need to rest your voice for what's going to be an exciting Saturday.
I need some rest. Got in late last night from Austin, but Y'all need some rest. Our fans need to get ready and be hyped for Saturday. But listen, I appreciate what you guys do for Alabama basketball. It sure has been fun lately, and I think the fun will continue. And hopefully, we're going to have a good time Saturday afternoon.
Sounds good. Thank you. We just want to thank Bryan for hopping on. Like he said, he got in late last night, and for him to come on during the probably one of the busier weeks of his career, especially with College Game Day and all the coverage that's going on with this game, just really appreciate him and his insight that he brings, and just being a guest for the show. But Charles, tee us off. I
It's
mean,
here.
it. I we didn't record a podcast this week because we knew that this was going to be an Auburn special. This is going to be coming out on Thursday, so we're going to have a space tonight with Pablo Escobar, like we always do every year with an Auburn game. So it's going to be a hopefully a good one tonight on Spaces. But you know, I mean we've had this circle. I mean, at the beginning of the season, yeah, I don't think we expected Auburn to be as good as they have been. But once you kind of saw them go out and win the Maui Invitational, and then they go and beat Purdue, beat Houston, all of these different things, where now you're going on the road to Duke, almost beat Duke at Duke, and then you start out 10-1 in the SEC, and now you're staring 1-2 or 1-1, as Brian likes to say, in the face. And I I mean, you've been a basketball fan a lot longer than I have, mainly due to age. But talk about this game from you growing up and as an Alabama fan, for going through, I guess, the dark years of Alabama basketball. What does this mean to you as a fan?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of my early just memories or favorite moments of Alabama basketball, and you can sometimes find the Sports Center clip from it when you had, as Mark Godfrey's second, I think either his second or third year at Alabama, we had the freshman class of Erwin Dudley, Kenny Walker, Terrence Mead, Rod Grisard, and we're playing number 7 Auburn in Tuscaloosa. And Auburn had just come off being a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament, had a Sweet 16 run, and was back, with Mamadou Injad and Chris Porter and Scott Pullman, and Cliff Ellis was their coach, and was number 7, number 8, in the country. And at that time, there still hadn't been a ton of student involvement as it related to Alabama basketball. That was probably really before student sections became a bigger thing as far as the antics and things like that. Well, I remember walking into Coleman Coliseum an hour before the game, and the entire student section is completely full. And you see, I think it was Philip Pearson, other assistants walking up and down the aisle, just passing out pizza boxes to students that were sitting in their seats. And we ended up winning the game 68-64. Grisard got hot at the end. I just remember the emotions of that game and just how intense it was. And up until that time, neither program had gotten, to that top level. I mean, Alabama under Wimp Sanderson was too young at that point to remember those teams, but both had really been kind of middle of the pack in the SEC. And both of them kind of seesawed for a while back and forth. One would be really good, and the other would not, and then it'd go the other way. What's I feel is wild about Alabama and Auburn's success recently is they just seem to tag team off of each other upwards now, that nobody's really taking a step back. Auburn makes the Final Four in 2019. I do want to mention they were not the first team from Alabama to make the Final Four. That was the Alabama women's program back in 1994. But they make the Final Four the same year that we hire Nate Oates, and then 5 years later, we're in the Final Four. Thinking about these NCAA tournament appearances, last year we're both sent to the same site. The year before that, we're both in the same site in Birmingham. It's very likely that we could both be for the first and second round game at the same site as well, potentially in Lexington, both as number 1 seeds. I thought it was funny last night too. Chaney Johnson's been a really good player for Auburn. I know he's averaged double figures, but he had a great game against Vanderbilt last night. And then as soon as that game ends, Jaron Stevenson has a great game. Kind of the sixth, seventh guy, maybe in the rotation or just as far as a scorer. And just both these teams, it's like, anything you can do, I can do better. And now, we have this game that, as you said, it's 1 versus 1. I think it's great that it's in Tuscaloosa so that the largest, arena for basketball in Alabama will actually get to hold this game. You don't have to be in a tiny gym or anything like that. And I know with that, that will allow some Auburn fans to get in there as well. And I think that's going to be, while we as Alabama fans can be frustrated by that, I think that's just going to add to the atmosphere because you know how both fan bases like to shout each other down. It's just the question I asked Bryan at the end as far as what you feel like this does for the state of Alabama as it relates to basketball. The G League with the squadron making their investment in having a team here, the NCAA starting to have more events here, getting more high profile teams like we did with Illinois playing against us, Purdue playing against Auburn. I expect us, Arizona, to be the team we play in Birmingham this year in 2025, but next season. It's just, I think as an Alabama basketball fan, it's great for our program. Obviously, for Auburn, it's great for their program. But if you just like basketball in this state and you've wanted basketball to be good, like this is where it all, of course, comes together in this game. And then, of course, we got another game like that a couple weeks down the road, being in Auburn. But it's kind of it's surreal. And very, just excited to see, of course, how the game plays out because that's part of this too. Is in my question to Bryan, you know, when this game ends, we still have games left on the schedule. You still have a lot of the season left in front of you. So as much as you want to win this game, we still have a lot of things in front of us that we've got to take care of, as that we want to have happen within this season for Alabama too.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and I've kind of labeled the Missouri game following this game as the ultimate trap game, right? Like if you're Missouri, you're kind of licking your chops a little bit for Alabama coming in, whether you win or whether Alabama wins or loses, right? Because the emotions of this game and the implications of this game, like it almost feels like the media is crowning the SEC champion following this game. Like that's what it feels like to me. Like, oh, whoever wins this game, they're the de facto SEC champion. When Alabama and Auburn still have 6 games left in the SEC following this, including another matchup. Um, but you're talking about the game at the end of the regular season. Well, what I'm hoping for is Alabama wins on Saturday and then wins the next 4 games to where the game at the end of the season, regular season, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Alabama's already locked it up. Um, Especially maybe if Auburn stumbles a little bit or whatever. Um, but you're right. Like I found it interesting Brian's perspective on the calmness of this team and the demeanor of the team because I was going to talk to him about this, but obviously I didn't want to go too much over time. What are your thoughts on this Alabama teams in and of themselves? Because they feel like they're exact opposite teams in my opinion, right? They do a lot of the same things, but Auburn is an extremely emotional, play with a lot of play with their heart on their sleeves. Whereas Alabama, I mean, they have shown emotion, but they're not this team that's gonna, you know, outside of a few instances that we've talked about throughout the year, like they're very calm, very almost introverted type of team where they don't let, regardless of what the environment is, they don't let that environment really get to them. Whereas I'm not saying Auburn does either because they've been fantastic on the road or and all of this, but like there's a very distinct difference of styles as far as like how the demeanors of these teams look. What are your thoughts on that?
I 100% agree. And I think that's what Auburn has kind of built their program around. It's not just this team, they have been a team full of emotions, and that can be a positive, or like their game against Florida over the weekend, it can be a negative. And I think in a game like this, where you're playing on the road, we didn't talk about officiating with Bryan, And we hope that officiating is not something that we talk about following the game. But in a 40-minute game, you're going to have at least a call go against you. And the way that you're able to react to that, I think is going to be very important in this game. Look, we know what has happened with Auburn this year, as far as airplane flights and things like that. And again, that can be a positive where you play with a lot of emotion and they're able to blow teams out like they've done this year. Or if we come out and smack them in the mouth early, hit threes and stuff like that, I expect them to still be a team to fight to the end. I mean, the only phrase that's used more than War Eagle is fight to the end with Auburn fans. So I expect them to keep fighting, but that mental game with some of their guys could be more challenging. I mean, I was watching the Vanderbilt game last night and give them credit. They started the game great. And I guess some Vanderbilt students got their cell phones and were blowing them up the night before. Well, Vanderbilt calls a timeout within the first 3 or 4 minutes, and the whole team goes over to the student section and is doing the cell phone signal and stuff like that. You just haven't seen that from an Alabama team, whether it's, taunting the opponent. I know Auburn did that against Ole Miss. Some guys on the bench, acting like they were crying and stuff like that. I feel like the most emotion I've seen from Alabama maybe all season was against Georgia when we had that quick spurt after Mike White's technical and Mark Sears kind of got the student section going, and maybe a little bit against Arkansas when we got on a run. And maybe that explains too why we just haven't closed teams out like I thought we maybe should in the second half where we've gotten big leads, is because we have been very businessman-like of just go out there, do our job, get the win, and get to the next one. So I think in my opinion, it benefits us from an emotional standpoint that this team is very even keel, because both teams will experience adversity at some point in the game on Saturday. And the ability to take that and keep playing is obviously going to be very important. And I feel more comfortable with our guys' ability to do that than what I've seen from Auburn. And Auburn has not faced a lot of adversity this year, but it was talked about after their game against Florida. That their body language was not good in that game when Florida was making all those shots. Give them credit, they made it a lot closer, but they have a lot of guys that play with emotion. So I think that's going to be a huge part of this game is how you handle your emotions and how you keep playing through adversity.
Yeah, and I think for Alabama and everyone listening that because there's probably a few Auburn fans that'll listen to this to either try to make fun or whatever, get hot takes. But for Alabama fans, like I think and I kind of joke around with this. Like I expect Alabama to be down at the under or the for this under 16 timeout to start the game. Like I expect Auburn to come out hot. I think that they're probably going to come out, hit some shots, and it's just going to be Alabama slowly, methodically doing what they do. Um, and there's an opportunity there where I think Alabama, if they just play their game, ultimately I think that they can beat Auburn. I don't think Auburn's this a lot of there's been a lot of talk about Auburn's on a tier on their own. They're so much better than everybody else. And I think at a time in the season, I think Auburn was very clearly the number one team. I think that they figured it out early and have kind of just been cruising. Whereas, like Bryan said, Alabama's kind of been a very good team and is slowly but surely getting better. I still would put Auburn as the number one team. I said that up following their game versus Florida. I'm not changing that. I do think that they've earned being the number one team, and I think that they are the best team in the country currently. But Alabama, if they just play their game, I think that, I mean, with the way that some of the things that I've seen with this Auburn team, like they're dead last in the SEC at like allowing teams to get to the rim in SEC play, right? They're one of the lower, or they're one of the lower teams in SEC as far as giving up fouls. Where what's Alabama been successful at this season? Drawing fouls and getting to the rim. Now maybe they're allowing people to get to the rim because their block percentages are so high, and they do a really good job at protecting the rim. But like Brian said, Alabama's rim decisions is what's going to win this game for Alabama. Mark Sears can't drive into the paint, try to put up a crazy shot because it's going to get blocked. He has to be smart with the basketball. You know, we can't get contact in the paint and expect a foul call and just throw up a shot and not get a foul call and then with your hands in the air, don't get back on defense, and then Auburn hits a three. Like these are like these momentum things that for a team like Auburn, they thrive off momentum. They thrive off of those energy plays that get them going. If you can limit the energy plays, limit the momentum for in this Auburn team, hit them in the mouth and methodically beat them down, it's just like what Florida did. Florida came out, punched them in the mouth, and instead of giving up these momentum plays that Auburn can go and do alley-oop dunks, they can go and hit these deep threes, right? Like they're playing solid defense, preventing those, and it it didn't break Auburn because the Auburn came back and won the Vanderbilt game, but it wore down Auburn to the point where you had Chad Baker Mazzara walking off the floor before the end of the game, right? And I think that's what Alabama has to do. What are your thoughts on that?
I think starting with what every Alabama fan talks about, turnovers. Like you got to take care of the ball. I think, if you can limit it to 10 or 12, that would be huge. But not only turnovers, points off of turnovers. As bad as the turnovers have been, the numbers have been for Alabama, Alabama's done a pretty good job of limiting teams' points off of turnovers. We weren't great last night. I think Texas averaged like 1.5 points per turnover. But we've typically held teams below 1 point, maybe around like 0.9 for every turnover that we have. In Auburn's two losses this year, against Duke and against Florida, both those teams did very, very well as far as not turning the ball over, but also taking advantage of the turnovers that they got from Auburn. I think they averaged something around 1 to 1.5 points. The other thing that both those teams did very well against Auburn was fast break points. I think in the game against Florida, Florida won the fast break point battle. I think it was 16-0. And I think Duke, it was like 13-2 or 13-4. So, getting out and running, which is what we do, I think will be very important. So that will be, but turnovers, as we always talk about, is going to be key because, like you said, don't have turnovers that are going to lead to momentum plays for Auburn with a dunk or a three or anything like that. I'm very interested to see how we guard Janai Broome. My expectation, starting the game where they've got Broome and Cardwell on the floor, is that you do try to match up Cliff against Broome because Broome is more of a back to the basket big. He can definitely play on the perimeter, but he's also got the ability to back somebody down, where Cardwell is not as much of a scoring threat. Now he's shown the ability to knock down a three, and he can obviously get offensive rebounds and get putbacks. But my expectation would be you try to match Cliff up on Janai as much as you can when he's got the ball, in the paint or on the block. But then on the flip side, if you're an Auburn fan, I think when you're on defense playing us, you probably put Janai on Grant Nelson because Janai's got more athleticism than Cardwell, and Grant playing around the perimeter and trying to get to the rim, Janai might be a better defensive matchup. And they tried to put Cardwell on Cliff. So I'm just very interested. Both teams can switch a lot, but very interested, when you get your defense set, how that will be kind of put together. Janai Broome's going to get a lot of points. What's going to be interesting from an Alabama and Auburn standpoint is they typically have one guy between Baker Mazzara, Pettiford, Kelly, or Denver Jones it's that guy's night to knock down threes for them. If Alabama can shut all four guys down, that'd be great. And what I mean shut down is just not have somebody go 4 of 6, 5 of 7, 3 of 4 from the 3-point line. Auburn has done a phenomenal job of sharing the basketball. They got 6 guys that average double figures. It's not about shutting down all of them and keeping them below their averages, but it's making sure one of them doesn't go for 20 or 25 points because they knocked down a bunch of threes or something like that. A guy who's been playing really, really well for Auburn, and I mentioned it early on, was Chaney Johnson, and he's their sixth scorer at averaging 10 points a game. So knowing where guys are on the floor, of course, with Bruce Pearl teams, he's going to run a lot of sets. He's going to run a lot of action. So making sure that you know the scouting reports. Our pick and roll defense was not good at Mississippi State. I could imagine seeing they're going to put Janai in a lot of that action potentially. I know a couple years ago they kind of killed us with Walker Kessler getting free runs to the basket coming off double pick and roll action. So just being able to know where you're supposed to be on defense, lock down, and then get defensive rebounds. Auburn does a great job of getting offensive rebounds, and we have not done a good job as far as getting defensive rebounds or getting as many as we should. I mean, I think teams against us are rebounding about a third of their misses, but when they get an offensive rebound, they're averaging about a point off of those offensive rebounds. Um, so being able to close out possessions and then just do what we do on the offensive side as far as being an efficient offense. I think these past two games, we've really found something on the offensive side. The inside game's working, the outside game's working. We're getting to the free throw line. It's just cleaning up the turnovers because, of course, when you turn the ball over, you're not putting points on the board and you're giving the other team another possession. But we've seen how efficient this offense is, where if you just get a shot up in a possession, you're typically going to score points on it. So taking care of the ball, of course, is going to be very, very important.
Absolutely. Well, Charles, I already know what you're going to predict. I mean, you're going to predict an Alabama win. I don't think I would ever doubt that from you.
Two,
Um,
3 weeks ago, I really thought that this was going to be a split series, but that both road teams would win their games. With how I feel like we are playing better with these three games. Um, I think it was really beneficial, not only last night in the game against Texas, but I think it'll be beneficial for this game Saturday that the team did not go back and forth from Fayetteville to Tuscaloosa to Austin. I think going to Fayetteville to Austin was a great decision. I think it kept them fresh. And I think it kept a day or two of not having to think about this game potentially. And then you get into Tuscaloosa and all the festivities and all that, start popping up around you while you start to get ready for this game. Yes, I am going with an Alabama win on Saturday, but it is a change from what maybe I originally thought of how this series would go this year of being split by the road teams.
and it still might be. There's no doubt in my mind that Auburn's going to come prepared. And I think it's great that, and I said this, I think in a group chatter on Twitter. I think it's great that both teams played last night. Last night being Tuesday night. One, because I think it gives the guys an extra day of preparation for both sides. But two, I think it was probably better that they got their game done on Tuesday rather than on Wednesday, because then you're sitting there on Tuesday and you're seeing all this media and all the coverage that's going on about talking about the game and all of this where now, like, from Wednesday until Saturday, like, you got that whole time to, one, focus on your preparation, but then also do all of this media stuff. You're not trying to cram everything in a, you know, 2 day period, right? You're not trying to cram because there's going to be media interviews. There's going to be, production things as far as like videos done during college game day. There's going to be, you know, interviews. There's all of these things that are going to be going on because college game day is going to be here. Everyone's going to be in town. And just to be able to have an extra day, and not just an extra day in Tuscaloosa, but like if Alabama would be playing tonight, right? They would have had to have flown to Austin last night or on Monday, stayed in Austin on Tuesday, or maybe they fly in on Tuesday, play the game tonight, fly back until 3 a.m., and then you have to turn around and prep Thursday and Friday while doing all of this other extracurricular stuff, to the point where, like, you don't feel like you have a chance to breathe and really kind of focus yourself and ground yourself. And I think that that's being grounded is what's going to be needed in this game. Um, because I talk about Alabama punching Auburn in the mouth. Auburn's going to punch Alabama in the mouth. Auburn's not going to be a team that's just going to roll over, and they're going to go on a run, and they're going to, play with these emotions. There's probably going to be a time where Auburn goes on a 10-0 run or something like that. Hopefully not, but maybe like 10-2, 12-2 run, something, and they're going to be flashy. They're going to be pointing at the crowd, and being able to kind of ground yourself is what's necessary. And I think all this extra time is it's what's going to help both teams, and especially Alabama, just be prepared.
Absolutely. Yeah, talking about Auburn punching in the mouth. I mean, I know you're meaning that figuratively. You could be meaning that literally for
Me,
their,
never.
yeah. Well, so I'm gonna say this. I feel convicted to say it. I know there's a video out there from 2 years ago when we won at Auburn, and some celebration by our fans, and the old Auburn fans decided they didn't like that and they wanted to get in those guys' faces and stuff like that. And some of this does come from the ridiculous Philip Marshall article that got posted last Saturday. I ask as an Alabama fan, win or lose, that Alabama fans, take it with class. And I just want to remind you, like, we're not the program that had a point shaving scandal a decade ago. That was Auburn. We're not the program that has a head coach that has a litany of NCAA infractions trailing him from almost every stop that he's been in college basketball. We don't have a basketball coach that tried to fight the rival's strength and conditioning coordinator, or tried to fight with other fans, or slam his headset, in front of everybody.
We also weren't involved. Well, I was going to say we weren't involved in an FBI investigation,
We
but
weren't involved in FBI
we
investigation.
kind of were.
Well, but we also don't have a coach that was accused by his peers of spying on practices and things like that when they would come to Auburn. Like, Alabama is the classier program. We are the better program. Auburn can be out there and talk about being the good guys and all that because they have to talk about it for it to be real in their mind. So I'm asking that for Alabama fans. Just show the class that we know we have. There will be Auburn people there. Welcome them into what is the largest arena for college basketball in the state of Alabama. Some of them it'll be their only time to watch an Auburn game. Hopefully it goes our way, but if not, we got a lot of things in front of us, and just know that we're the better program at the end of the day.
Hey, look, and for Auburn fans, this is probably the cheapest ticket for you of the season. You talk about ticket prices, and for all the randomness that is that argument, which is you're celebrating the fact that you have to pay more money to go to your games, which is absurd to me that's something that you enjoy doing. But um, come to Coleman Coliseum, come see the hangar. You say it's a dump, come see it for yourself. And for the Alabama fans, I'll say this: for the Alabama fans that sell their tickets to Auburn fans, just give up your season tickets. Like, truthfully, I I know that some people do it for companies, and there's other reasons why they get put them on StubHub or SeatGeek, and I get it. You get $600 for a pair of tickets. Like, of course you're going to take it. That's almost all of your donation or your season tickets. I get it. But you can get $600 from an Alabama fan just as much as you can an Auburn fan. Why would you want someone that's an opposing fan in your arena? That's a ticket conversation that we'll have for another day. But um, no, for Alabama fans, enjoy it. It's not often, if ever, currently never, that you have a game like of this magnitude. And I made jokes years ago, not years ago, it was a couple years ago, where it felt like since NATO's got hired at Alabama, it was Auburn was really good one year, and then the next year Alabama was really good. Similar to what you were saying about how you're one-upping each other, but it was never Alabama and Auburn were good on the same year. Last year you got a taste of it where Alabama and Auburn were pretty good teams, really good teams. Alabama gets the Final Four, Auburn gets kicked out in the first round. Um, to a Yale team. That's super unfortunate. But um, this year it feels different. There's an opportunity for Alabama and Auburn to have 4 games against each other. The 2 in the regular season SEC tournament and potentially a tournament game in the NCAA tournament. So this is maybe one of 4 games that Alabama and Auburn could see each other. So don't blow your load on the first one. I know it's a big one, but um, just I'm just so excited that this rivalry is to this point to where to where you're I mean this isn't just SEC implications. This isn't just state implications. These are national implications, national seeds, where for those of you who don't know, the top 16 seeds are going to be revealed on CBS on Saturday, before the game. So just I'm excited. I don't know what else to say about it.
We've been talking about it since June or July, and it's finally here. Like you said, I think it's going to be uh, enjoyable. I think it's going to be fun up until 3 o'clock, and then I think nerves will start setting in on both sides. But uh, it is. I hope both Alabama fans and Auburn fans can respect each other. That this is really cool for both programs. It'll be really cool for both programs in Auburn at the end of the year too. And like I think both can feel very confident that their basketball programs are here to stay on the national stage for a long time. So yeah, I'm ready to watch our guys get after them on Saturday.
Absolutely. I'll just say this real quick. Blame Charles if we lose. He's the one that is giving me a ticket. And I have not had very much good success in Tuscaloosa of recent memories. So, um,
But since we'll be together, if you see us, please come up and say hello. We'd
yeah,
love to
yeah,
shake a hand and put some face with names and stuff like that for different spaces that we host as well.
absolutely. Well, speaking of spaces, like I said, we'll have one tonight. We're probably, actually, I'm not going to say probably. We're not going to have one following the Auburn game. Just because I'm in Tuscaloosa, I don't like to do spaces, but we'll probably do one on Sunday following
We'll,
the game, win or lose.
we'll find a place to do a live space for anybody that's in.
Yeah, yeah. Well, maybe I'll talk to Heat Pizza. We'll go to Heat Pizza for dinner or something like that, and uh, have people we can talk to about all of it, win or lose, because in Tuscaloosa, kind of got to deal with it. But anyway, this has been the Crimson Crossover Podcast. I think that's all we got for you, and we will talk again soon. Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.